The Leader of the Opposition.
I move that this House 1. Acknowledge the historic action of the Holt government with bipartisan support from the Australian Labor Party in initiating the dismantling of the White Australia policy. 2. Recognise that since 1973, successive Labor and Liberal National Party governments have, with bipartisan support, pursued a racially non-discriminatory immigration policy to the overwhelming national and international benefit of Australia. And 3. Give its unambiguous and unqualified commitment to the principle that whatever criteria are applied by Australian governments in exercising their sovereign right to determine the composition of the immigration intake, race, faith or ethnic origin shall never, explicitly or implicitly, be amongst them.
Yeah.
Okay. The 3 points in the motion that are taken are actually taken word for word just about from a motion that Prime Minister Hawke moved in this parliament on the 25th of August 1988, 30 years ago next week. It does take, I have to say, in this world, you have to be pretty outrageous to be condemned by everybody in the Australian parliament, but Senator Anning has managed to do just this. Condemned because the blight of racism and discrimination is not new. But truth is always the best defence against racism. There is no historical experience and no contemporary evidence that race determines bad behaviour, none at all. As I've said, this is not a new debate. Catholic and Jewish migrants have had to deal with discrimination because of their faith. Successive waves of Italians and Greeks, Eastern Europeans after the Second World War, Vietnamese migrants in the 1970s and 80s. Newly arrived Muslim and African communities are facing it now. The first Australians know all about the harm done by prejudice. But the simple truth is this. We are a stronger, better country because all of those who have come across the seas and joined their story to ours. Mr Speaker, I move this motion today because we need to defend the great national convention of Australian politics. Race is beyond politics. I'm asking the government, and I'm pleased that the Prime Minister and the Minister for Home Affairs are here, to support a motion which reaffirms the great bond of our major parties, to defend our national sense of decency, our trust in Australia. I'm sure the Prime Minister will say comparable things because I know that he is not a racist. And this statement will be stronger if it is supported by the members of the House of Representatives. We should do this together. Mr Speaker, in the corrosive and fragmented climate of public debate, it has become unfortunately common for some to seek out attention by picking on minorities, the less powerful, while attacking in the most vile terms normally someone who cannot defend themselves. Around the world, right-wing extremists are turning this into a political art form. They say something hateful or homophobic or sexist or racist, something designed to humiliate and denigrate and hurt, and when their comments are condemned, they complain about political correctness gone mad or the thought police stifling their free speech, all the while basking in the media attention. I have no doubt that was the cynical intention last night, and we've seen it again in a string of media appearances by Senator Anning this morning. I understand that in one sense there might be a reason to simply ignore it, to starve the stupidity of oxygen, to treat it as beneath contempt. But as leaders, as representatives of the Australian people, as servants of diverse communities in our great multicultural nation, we cannot stay silent in the face of racism. We cannot ignore the kind of prejudice and hate that the senator sought to unleash last night. Free speech is a cherished value in Australian society, but it is not an unfettered right to hurt, to bully, to intimidate, to make some Australians feel less equal than other Australians. We have to call it out. We must condemn it. We have to speak truth. We have to stand against it strong and united. I acknowledge already many members and senators, as word has gone out of this speech, have stood up and spoken out. I acknowledge their courage. It is time for the parliament to once again draw a line to say no more. No more racism, no more crossing the street, no more turning a blind eye, no more if we just ignore it, it will go away. This is not commentary in the social media, this is commentary in the Parliament of Australia. It is time for every serious parliamentarian and political party to show the courage to put candidates who advocate racism last. Yeah. Malcolm Fraser knew this, John Howard got there. It is time for all of us to say enough. No more deals with racist parties, no more preferences for racism. Yeah. When it comes to opposing racism, Labor will not hold back. We will not play a straight bat, stay silent and hope for the best. We know that racism fills the silences, discrimination thrives in the darkness. The only way to stop it is to haul each of these hateful falsehoods into the light and expose them for the harmful fiction they are. Labor is proud to be a party of multicultural Australia, a party of tolerance, a party to heal the nation. Now, we weren't always there. But modern Labor, from the time of Whitlam and Hayden, Hawke and Keating and Evans and Beazley and Rudd and Gillard, not once has the inclination of modern Labor altered. Yes, we can establish better processes of integration. Yes, better promotion of understanding. But let us be clear that Australia won't achieve any of what our nation's great destiny can be by pulling the racist lever. As Senator Wong put it this morning, dividing our nation does not make us safer. I think it is important to quote the former head of ASIO, the respected David Irvine. He said, "The tiny number of violent extremists does not represent the Islamic communities of Australia. It is grossly unfair to blame Muslims who see themselves as the committed component of Australian multicultural society." He went on to say, "Our fight is with terrorism. It is not with Islam or with our Muslim community. The strongest defence against violent extremism lies within the Australian Muslim community itself." Senator Anning needs to understand this. What he seeks to do is, when he undermines our national harmony, when he says some Australians are better Australians than other Australians, he risks weakening our national security. Mr Speaker, Senator Anning's speech boiled down to one big lie about Australia, that every challenge we face can be blamed on our newest arrivals, that all of our problems can be solved by turning back the clock and closing ourselves off from the world. But here is the truth about Australia. We are a nation made great by immigration. We are strong because we are diverse. We are a richer, smarter, more interesting, more prosperous destination because of people who have built a new life here. Many who come here just with the clothes on their back, people who've worked hard, started early, stayed late, opened businesses, built communities, looked after their neighbours, raised children, served in local, state and federal politics, cared for their elders, paid taxes, worn the uniform of our country. People from all traditions who've added their story to our own. People from every country who have made us a better country. People of every faith who share a common belief in Australia. What Senator Anning and Senator Hanson and some of the rest pine for is the supposed good old days of white Australia. But they're not just insulting new arrivals, they're denigrating everything that all Australians have put together in the last half-century. Whether their families have been here for 1 generation, 8 generations or 2,000 generations. People who seek to lecture others about Australian values need to know that racism is not an Australian value. Yeah. Mr Speaker, as for the Senator's use of the term the final solution, it's a phrase torn from the darkest pages of human history. 2 words which speak for the brutalisation and murder of millions. 2 words that evoke fear and grief and trauma and loss in diaspora families all over the world and many others. The Senator ridicules his critics by saying these words need to be seen in their context. Well, that is exactly the problem. This wasn't a piece of Twitter stupidity composed in haste. It was a first speech 9 months in the making. The context of these words is prejudice. It is a speech filled with prejudice. And this, like everything else, deserves nothing but condemnation. It's always been easy for candidates who style themselves as outsiders or mavericks to blame minorities, to demonise difference, to try and divide Australia by putting the blame onto one particular group or another. Truth and consistency doesn't trouble these people. They say that migrants are bludgeoning on welfare, but they're also buying all our houses. They say they're uneducated, but they're filling our universities. The list goes on. Let's be very clear about this. Let's just speak truth. Traffic jams on freeways and overcrowded trains are not an argument against migration. They're proof we need to build better roads and more public transport. Low wages are not an argument against migration. They're proof we need policies to boost pay, improve bargaining and restore penalty rates. The argument that people are locked out of the housing market is not an argument against migration. It's an argument for a fairer tax system, a level playing field. Crime is not a migration problem. Violence is not a migration problem. No one on this side of the House is minimising the challenges that real people face in their daily lives. This parliament should put forward plans and policies to help. But we do not seek to insult the intelligence of the Australian people that by blaming every problem in this country on decent, hard-working, law-abiding people who are just trying to make this a better place. In recent times, the great national convention of Australia that race should be above politics has been breached. Now it is time for all of us who seek to represent the national interest to support this motion, to prove that the convention has not been broken, to show that Australia's major parties stand against racism and prejudice. In conclusion, Mr Speaker, there is a lot of debate about the Australian identity and what makes a good Australian. But today I want to say that what makes a good Australian is not governed by the number of generations you've been here. 2,000 generations, 8 generations, or one. What makes a good Australian is not what God you worship, not where your ancestors come from or how much money you have. It is not your skin colour, your postcode, your occupation or your gender. What makes a good Australian is what is in here in your heart. What makes a good Australian is, are you a good neighbour? Do you raise your family? Do you pay your taxes? Do you obey the law? Good Australians are not just born, they can become good Australians by choice. Good Australians are people who stand up for minorities, for the less powerful, for the fair go all round. A good Australian is not dictated by skin colour or worship. It is not dictated by what faith you adhere to. It is whether or not you adhere to our laws and raise your family well. A good Australian is the kindness you show in another's trouble and the courage you show in your own. A good Australian is someone who adheres to our values, and our values include standing up for the less powerful. Thank you very much.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Thank the member for Sydney. The question is the motion be agreed to. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I condemned the racist remarks of Senator Anning last night as soon as I heard of them, and I've condemned them already today, and I condemn them again here in this House. Let me say, Mr Speaker, we live in the most successful multicultural society in the world, and our success is built on a foundation of mutual respect. We have one of the most successful immigration programs in the world. We are a migration nation. Who could claim to have a better one? And we manage it on a thoroughly non-discriminatory basis. And it too is built on a foundation of strong leadership and the control of our borders, so that Australians know that people who come here because the government has agreed to them doing so. The people's representatives agree to them doing so. And we've managed that program in a world where there is so much disharmony, and where in many places in the world where people of different faiths and different races had lived side by side reasonably harmoniously for hundreds of years, and now seem unable to do so. Despite all of that, here in Australia, in the midst of our diversity, we live in great harmony. So we have so much to be proud of, but we can never take it for granted. We must always stand up for our commitment to an Australia that defines itself by reference to shared political values: freedom, democracy, the rule of law, a fair go. Those are our values, and they are accessible to people of every race, any religion or none, of any cultural background. So that is how we define our nation. Now, just a little while ago, the Leader of the Opposition and I launched together a book by Emma Campbell called The Last Post, and it tells 30 of the stories of Australian servicemen and women that have been honoured in the last post ceremonies at the War Memorial that all of us have attended from time to time. And it reminds us that when you fling open all the doors in this parliament, from my office, the Prime Minister's office at the back, through the Cabinet room where the great decisions of government are made, through the Members' Hall uniting the House and the Senate, through the Great Hall, looking across the lake, what do we see as the Australian War Memorial? And it reminds us there, in its splendid simplicity, in its serenity, that every freedom we exercise here was hard won and today is hard held by the men and women of the Australian Defence Force. Over 102,000 fallen Australians honoured there. And they have come from every race, from every culture, from every religion and of none, our first Australians to the most recent migrants, all of them united in their commitment to defending our values. Now the Leader of the Opposition acknowledges it was not always so. It's true. It was in 1965 the Labor Party abandoned, removed the White Australia policy from its charter. And in 1966, Harold Holt, Liberal Prime Minister, abandoned, repealed any legislation that enabled a White Australia policy or discrimination against migrants on the basis of their race or religion. That was a great Liberal achievement. And, of course, in 1967 we had the great referendum, long overdue, but an enormously uniting statement of commitment to equality. So we have always stood against racism ever since those days. The days of the White Australia policy are long, long ago. And our success is founded on our commitment to a shared national identity committed to those political values which unite us all. Now, I want to refer to the remarks that have been made about terrorism. Let me say this. The vast majority of the victims of Islamist terrorism are Muslims. The Islamist terrorists are, in the words of my friend President Joko Widodo, the President of Indonesia, they are blasphemers. He says they are not Muslims. They are denounced and abhorred by the vast majority of Muslims around the world and particularly here in Australia. Let's be quite clear. Those who seek to demonise all Muslims on the basis of the crimes of a tiny minority are helping the terrorists. Let's be very clear about this. I say this as Prime Minister whose most solemn responsibility is to keep Australians safe. I want to say this very carefully, solemnly, seriously. The terrorists' argument, the Islamist terrorists' argument to other Muslims is your country, Australia, is not your country. They don't want you. They hate you. You're not ever going to be really Australian. Join the war on our side. So those who try to demonise Muslims because of the crimes of a tiny minority are only helping the terrorists. The reference in Senator Anning's speech to the final solution is a shocking insult to the memory of over 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. Can I say here in Australia, and particularly in my city of Melbourne, the honourable member opposite in his city of Sydney and his city of Melbourne, we have the largest number of Holocaust survivors outside of Israel. The reference to the final solution in that speech was appalling, and we condemn that and the insult it offered to the memory of those Jewish martyrs, just as we condemn the racism, a shocking rejection of the Australian values that have made us the successful multicultural nation that we are today. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition said perhaps we should not say too much about the Senator's remarks at the risk that we give oxygen to stupidity, I think was the Leader of the Opposition's words. I believe it's important always to call out racism. It is, we need to call it out. We need to stand up for what we are, a free society, the most successful multicultural society in the world, united by democratic values that do not distinguish between race, religion, colour, cultural background, a nation that is united in its commitment to respect, mutual respect for people of every religion, of every race, of every background. We should be so proud of our achievement. In today's world, it is remarkable. It is the envy of the world. We should all here be proud of this and condemn, as we have, racism and discrimination of the kind so regrettably expressed, so shamefully expressed by Senator Anning.